Okay, good morning, everyone. I got the sign that we can start. We are a little bit late. Welcome to Spotlight Session 7 on mutual transparency and accountability in multi-stakeholder partnerships, including philanthropy and private social investment. We heard it loud and clear yesterday at the opening session that unfortunately we are not on track to reach the 2030 agenda. And that means that it is urgent that we take action in building trust among all stakeholders, building an enabling environment and effective multi-stakeholder collaboration. I am Esther Filippini, Deputy Director of the Transparency and Accountability Initiative, which is it's a collaborative of private philanthropic organizations that came together to leverage the power of tools like transparency, participation, and accountability to build advanced, more inclusive democracies where power and resources are more equally distributed. It is also our goal to encourage philanthropic organizations to rethink the question of power and how they themselves need to become more transparent and accountable. And we had the privilege to work together with Wings on this specific aspect. And today I will be your moderator. And as you can see, we have a very rich, distinguished panel, very diverse as well. And I am honored to present you my colleagues here today. Because of the shortness of time, I will not tell you about their very rich biography. Please look into the materials. But I will go and try to start here. Monica Asuna, Miss Monica Asuna is the Head of Development Effectiveness Secretariat at the National Treasury and Economic Planning of the Government of Kenya. We have Derek Ray Hill with us, the Director of the International Strategy and Corporate Services at Charities Aid Foundation. Mr. Andrew Wilson. He's the Executive Director of the Center for International Private Enterprise. Ms. Lisa Dakanai. She's Founding President of the Institute for Social Entrepreneurship in Asia. Her Royal Highness, the Infanta Cristina of Spain, who is the Director of the International Area of La Caixa Foundation. We have also Ms. Naila Faruqi. She is the CEO and Executive Director of the Arab Foundations Forum. And last but not least, Mr. Benjamin Beleji. Did I say it correctly? The Executive Director of Wings. And he will give us an opening intervention to set the stage. So please, Benjamin, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Esther. And thanks to all of you for being here. Well, philanthropy is known for a number of things, but it's not known for its transparency and accountability. And it's something that we absolutely need to work on for various reasons. And we at Wings, we're a network that works with 200 members around the world to strengthen the philanthropic sector, make it more effective, more impactful, more collaborative. And this question around transparency is quite key in our work. We'll present a new toolkit that we're launching that is about transparency for foundations and philanthropic actors with very practical recommendations for them to improve the way they share information about their work, about their strategies, about where their funding goes, where their resources come from, and also what is the kind of impact and results that they're seeing. And the reason that is really critical is that first, we need, and I think that's been a cross-cutting theme throughout all these discussions here in this summit, is the need for trust between sectors, between actors, because we need collaboration, we need synergies, we need to engage jointly and embrace the complexity of the issues. No one can address the kind of challenges we're facing globally, as a single actor or as a single sector. But that takes trust, and trust is only based in mutual understanding and sharing of, the reality of our work and what we're doing. And for many reasons, including cultural reasons, sometimes philanthropists tend to, prefer to remain discreet, don't want to show off, or there are a number of reasons. But it's really important for this collaboration, but also to be a legitimate partner, to allow for public scrutiny, to be accountable first and foremost to the communities that we're trying to serve, and to the movements and the organizations that we're trying to support. So that's of course something that takes institutions, that takes tools, that takes incentives and a change of mindset and a change of culture around that. And so at Wings, with our members, and some of them are here on this stage, we're working towards that common goal. Just to also maybe finish these very quick remarks, one of the things that Wings is trying to do collectively, and one of the reasons we're here with a delegation from members from over the world, representing different forms of philanthropy, is that we want to advocate for better policies, an enabling environment, enabling regulatory environment for the philanthropic sector, and of course more broadly for civil society. And we know that we cannot effectively advocate towards government if we don't put our own house in order, if we are not able to show the kind of impact we have and why we're critical partners to reach the Agenda 2030. So with this, I'll just hand over to Esther to continue the discussion, and thanks again for being here.
Thank you, Benjamin. And you are very modest because you didn't mention the very valuable toolkit that Wings has produced like 10 years ago on the transparency and accountability of the philanthropic sector, and that is currently revised. It will be published very soon, and it will give a very, very practical guide to the philanthropic sector, also adaptable to different sizes and types of philanthropy, but to question ourselves internally how to become better grant makers, more transparent and accountable ones. So that's an excellent work done. I mean, the topic that we are talking about in this session is actually cutting across everything that is discussed here in this event, in this summit. And it's also one of the main elements, one of the main principles of the effectiveness principles. It is also very closely linked to the yesterday's spotlight session on enabling environment, and I can see even in the panel, people who were also sitting in that panel yesterday, and in the audience, I see people from that panel, because they are very closely interlinked. Because we do recognize that we need to build trust, to be able to work more in collaboration. We understand that we can only achieve the common goals of the 2030 agenda if we work in that collaborative way. But in an age of mis and disinformation, concentration of economic power, the growing inequalities, building trust is not really a simple business. So we need to reassess accountability processes with focus on inclusion and equity. And I will make just 3 very brief points on what I think we all need to observe, independently of whether we are in government, private sector, civil society, or philanthropy, if we want to make progress and mobilize more resources at the domestic level for development cooperation. First, jointly across sectors and actors, we have to defend an environment that allows for meaningful participation of all, where we can find what unites us, what we can work together towards. And we need for that clear and simple rules, standards, even through self-regulation, and this was mentioned yesterday, that keeps us transparent and accountable to the people and the planet that we aim to serve. But these rules, these standards need to be fair, practical, and enabling, not blocking that participation. Second, we need to support and build the infrastructure for that to locally co-created and led solutions to flourish, especially those that put gender and racial equity at the front. But we also need to invest in connecting these experiences across borders, because our challenges are global in nature and complex, and we can only address them if we have that multilateral collaboration that we see. It's in crisis now, but one that we think it's still the best way to address these common challenges. And my third point is quite specific. Every event we participate these days will put high on the agenda to the urgency of addressing the climate crisis. But this urgency should not be at the cost of social justice. The transparency and accountability is essential in these processes because we can only achieve solving the climate crisis if social justice is at the heart of our actions. So we will now hear from this incredible panel about what works in each of the sectors where they work, promoting the greater ambitions of open and accountable operations, and also about the challenges and tasks that they see ahead of us. So I will start here at my right with Monica. And you mentioned yesterday that you observed the lack of effective dialogue among the different actors in your country and in the broader region. But you also have made lots of efforts toward bridging these gaps. So can you tell us a bit how transparency and accountability tools helped in building trust and mobilized resources in your country?
Okay, thank you, Esther. Good morning. Yeah, so I'll maybe start with just a brief on Kenyan's, constitution. The Kenyan's constitution under Article 35 provides for access to information, and under that article, Section 4 of it also directs the state to publish any important information affecting the nation. So in addition to the Kenyan's constitution, also the Kenyan's Public Finance Act also defines modalities for financial accounting, reporting, and auditing. Also, who needs to report, especially if you are implementing public programs whose intended beneficiary is the public or the citizens of Kenya. It further goes to demand also disclosure to the intended beneficiary once the resources are received. So once the resources maybe are received, then if the intended beneficiary is maybe the Ministry of Health or maybe a community in the grassroots, then it defines that you should inform them that you've received resources and what the intended objective of those resources are for. Therefore, transparency and accountability also calls for relevant information. So in this sharing of information, we know there are right now issues of, data security and all that. So it demands only what is that relevant information you are supposed to share. And it is also this demand is for government, the public, and also the partners. So in Kenya, then the government has taken bold steps to really implement the transparency and accountability principle. The Public Finance Management Act always demands that the National Treasury publishes, its annual report on resources received, how it was budgeted, and how it was utilized. So if you go to the National Treasury website, which is at treasury.go.ke, then you can find that, a range of information on financial management that we report. And that also boils across government ministries. There's also support to report on their programs. So in that, Kenyan's fiscal transparency has gained us a lot in that Kenya can, being a lower middle income country, we don't access more of grants these days. It's more of blended finance, concessional loans, and also accessing the international capital markets. So you find that with that fiscal transparency, then Kenya can access the international capital markets and issue bonds out there in the EU market and also in the diaspora. So this has also attracted a lot of investors. Also, just for information, also my portfolio also revolves investor relations. So I'm head of the investor relations, which is a unit an office in the National Treasury. So based on that, on almost a weekly or monthly basis, we receive investor calls. We also receive requests for investors who really want to have more information on, our fiscal plans, our fiscal consolidation plans, and also areas they can collaborate with Kenya and invest. And even our bonds which are issued, the Euro bonds, have also created a lot of interest, and there are so many investors. Always when we issue a Euro bond, we always get oversubscription because of that fiscal transparency and the macroeconomic management of our economy, which is really sound. Even amidst the pandemic, we really maintained some, fiscal discipline. So this has also boosted the resource mobilization initiatives as we can access all those types of funding, the multilateral funding, bilateral, and also the international money markets, as I've mentioned. So what does this mean? So being transparent and accountable, therefore, improves even our rating. So Kenyan rating also, in terms of our credit rating agencies, in as much as right now, because of COVID and other issues, and also the demand for heavy, expenditures in the country in terms of infrastructure development and all that, then you find that, yes, our public debt is high, but it is sustainable. And based on our credit rating also, we are still at a very sustainable level. So we can still access the international money market. So just to mention also, Kenya has, we have the Kenya Philanthropy Forum, which brings about 40 philanthropic organizations. And it is housed by the UNDP, Kenya. So you find that this has started bringing the philanthropy on board, and then also they are also mapped into sectors. It's still not very vibrant, but then it's a step in the right direction. So you find that based on this also, Kenya accesses, and because of the transparency and accountability, there are foundations that are closely working with the government, whose resources are on budget, approved by the National Assembly. And these are like the Ford Foundation, AGRA, and then also the Bill and Melinda Gates. Now, they are separate. So, just also to summarize in that, other collaborations are also with the private sector. For example, we have Wings to Fly Education Scholarship Program, which is managed by the Equity Foundation in Kenya, the Safaricom Foundation, and among others. So just in a nutshell, and because of time, transparency and accountability builds trust and makes everyone a trusted partner that you can comfortably work in. So it is a building block that we must all endeavor to really apply in our day-to-day work. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Monica. Yeah, it's really impressive effort and absolutely clear example of how transparency and more accountability is attracting more investment and more trust from different actors. My next question is quite related, Derek, and we have been checking the most recent Charities Aid Foundation Word Giving report. And that suggests that to allow cross-border and local giving, more transparency and accountability has to be built in both the government and the civil society side. So does transparency and accountability influence the willingness to give?
In a couple of words, absolutely. And just to introduce the Charities Aid Foundation briefly to people, we are a philanthropy services organization, and our mission is to accelerate progress in society towards a fair and sustainable future for all. And the vast majority of work that we do to deliver that is we help people give. And we believe very strongly that it is our job to do everything in our power to make your gift as impactful, as sustainable, and as meaningful as possible, whether you have $100 to give or $100 million to give. And we work with donors across the full spectrum, from regular employees to high net worth individuals to major corporations. We have a couple of different data points for today's conversation on the importance of transparency and accountability. The first is that we published the World Giving Index, which you referred to, which tracks local philanthropic cultures in over 110 countries around the world. And every year, what it reveals very clearly is that you do not have to be a rich, developed country to have a vibrant philanthropic culture. Another data point is that, as I said, we help people give. And in the last year, we helped people give in the region of £876 million to not-for-profit organizations based in 135 countries around the world. And instantly, that leads me to point 3, which is that the World Giving Index, which we work on using Gallup data and we think is immensely sophisticated, tracks giving in 110 countries, or national philanthropic culture in 110 countries. Donors are so much more creative, so much more informed, and so much more dynamic that they've actually found 135 countries to give to. So what that tells us is that as long as we have the right channels to absolutely reassure the donor they are making a grant which is charitable in nature, charitable in purpose, and hopefully impactful in outcome, we can diversify funding worldwide. And if we work under the framework of the UN SDGs and accept the UN SDGs as a broad and inspiring roadmap to furthering humanity, then we can help to connect the dots to achieve an accelerated outcome towards the UN SDGs. And I should just say that we are only beginning to understand how cross-border philanthropy can help and can be harnessed to deliver more UN SDGs. But there's no doubt, Monica, that Kenya remains one of the most frequent destinations of grants via the Charities Aid Foundation. And I'm absolutely sure that's a combination of your very progressive UN SDG platform and the transparency and accountability that you have locally. And what we need to do to foster trust, we believe, around the world is articulated in the introduction to the World Giving Index every year, but essentially boils down to 3 points. One is that we need to encourage governments around the world to adopt common and universal standards on what it means to be a not-for-profit organization and what it means to be giving a not-for-profit gift. That governments around the world need to avoid being threatened by civil society in their countries and embrace them as a means of diversifying the delivery of outcomes under their auspices. And that thirdly, donors need to stop getting so hung up on not funding overheads. By definition, deliver the UN SDGs, there is a gap in the region of $4 trillion in funding. And there is not locally all of the infrastructure available to deliver those outcomes and absorb that level of funding, even if we were able to supply it. So as funders, we all need to embrace more unrestricted funding and funding overheads and infrastructure costs. I hope that's helpful.
That's music to my ears. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Common and universal standards that are simple to follow and implement and that are not creating more obstacles than helping the collaborations. It's very important. And there is lots of conversation among funders about lots of conversation, but much more should be done to really be more flexible in the support. And it's also a question of not just trust, but power, right? How we are letting the agenda to be led by others and give that opportunity. So turning to Andrew, I mean, also in your work at SIPE, how do I, SIPE? Yeah.
Spanish SIPE.
SIPE, yeah. So, all these acronyms, right? The main goal is improving transparency and accountability in the public and private sectors and increasing support for democratic rights and freedoms. So what are some good examples of the implementation of transparency and accountability, and what have been the main challenges and opportunities that we can watch in your sector?
Well, thank you very much. And we work at the intersection of the private economy and democracy around the world. So questions of ethics and transparency become very important to us and our stakeholders. And having been doing this work for over 25 years, I have to say that the trend lines are positive in the private sector. In terms of corporate governance, risk management has now become to the forefront of how boards look at their role inside an organization, and risk emanating from corruption or other sorts of lack of controls is a key interest area. And to your earlier point, I think the private sector also realizes that it has to put its own house in order if it's going to be active on corruption-related issues. The other contributing factor that I think is to the good news side of things is the growth of ESG within the private sector and ESG reporting. It is driving through supply chains, and the globalization actually has been a positive in this sense, in that when we have more complicated supply chains that are reaching down into emerging markets, it really is a tool for those of us who are interested in promoting greater transparency in the corporate world to target our efforts, because small and mid-sized firms want to join global supply chains, but to do so they have to demonstrate certain levels of transparency and accountability within the organization. The challenge that we've got is building capacity and building support for these types of movements, especially in the small and mid-sized firms. So if you're in an emerging market, you may have heard of ESG. You may know that there are standards out there, but actual access to what a standard is, because often there are competing standards, and how to implement that in the right size for the right firm. So what would ESG mean in a small business is very different to what ESG might mean in a multinational. And it's how do we reach these small and mid-sized firms at the country level that becomes the issue. We've looked at a couple of different approaches in terms of capacity building. Collective action is very a powerful tool. We've worked with the stock exchange in Thailand for several years on a program there in which they've created a sort of a certification program for companies to self-certify that they utilize anti-corruption and transparency within their controls, and can actually have their auditors come in every couple of years and confirm that the systems are in place and being used. And by doing so, they get put on a higher tier of transparency within the stock exchange. So there's a real peer support effort that goes into that, and rewarding people. The other is to look at this as trying to create sustainable training programs for organizations on the whole slate of compliance issues, not just anti-corruption compliance, but environmental, labor, and other standards. And we've been developing in Africa a program called Ethics First. It's now in 19 countries, and that works through chambers of commerce and business associations to provide accessible and affordable training to firms, and then also allows for a self-certification at the close of that. And so the trick here, I think, really, when we talk about building trust and building systems of trust, one is the education, but the other is some form of verification or standard that exists. And that is really the toughest part of this movement, is how do you verify that a company is actually doing what it says it's doing? And you know, very few organizations want to certify because of liability issues and other things. So it really is an honor system at this stage, but we need to do more work on trying to figure out how to do that. The other challenge we've got moving forward, and I'll just touch on this very briefly, is, you know, not all investment and investors are equal. There is competing investments from countries perhaps where standards are ignored. I won't go into naming names here, but I think we all know that there are some very large investors in the world who don't necessarily hold themselves to ESG standards, nor is there a framework for it in their own countries. And it's easy capital to get, and what it tends to do when it gets into a country with a weak rule of law is it will find those fissures, and it'll expand the fissures of corruption. So we call it corrosive capital. And that's sort of the piece that we need to figure out how to address better. We can't stop these wealthy countries from investing. We don't want to. They have a role to play. But what we do need to do is to focus at the country level to make sure that investment laws and other forms of oversight of capital coming into the country are enforced. And civil society has a role to play in that in terms of oversight and just keeping an eye on things. That's all I'll say.
Thank you. Thank you. And you didn't get a clap of hands, come on. It was a tough topic. But indeed, it sounds like wherever we are coming from, we end up getting to the place where we need mutual accountability and the space where we can all come together and verify each other. And you also mentioned peer support, like we like very much naming and shaming each other, but sometimes it's more motivating and more viable to look at the good examples and motivate each other with those, giving the peer support you mentioned. And this kind of leads us really nicely, Lisa, to the next question, because you have incredible experience accumulated in supporting social enterprises that bring innovative solutions to local social problems, delivering basic economic services. And you are also empowering women through the entire transformational initiative way in the agricultural value chain. So what are some of the best practices that social enterprises bring in partnering with civil society, philanthropy, and governments?
Thank you, Esther. The Institute for Social Entrepreneurship in Asia is a consortium of social enterprises, social enterprise resource institutions, including civil society organizations, and also academic institutions that are working together to promote the mainstreaming of social entrepreneurship in general, but in particular in developing countries, social enterprises with the poor as primary stakeholders, as a strategy to actually leave no one behind. And in that context, we actually set up, we do capacity building, we do research, we do the development of platforms for inclusive recovery, building back fairer, not only better, and also accelerating the Sustainable Development Goals. And one of the main platforms that we set up in 2020 during a conference that we co-convened with UNESCAP in Asia Pacific is a platform called Women's Empowerment, Livelihoods and Food in Agricultural Value Chains. And we were able to set up this platform with the support of Oxfam and the Swedish Embassy in Bangkok. And the platform actually started by looking at best practices of social enterprises in agricultural value chains. And the study of best practices of social enterprises in agricultural value chains in 4 countries in Asia led us to a set of benchmarks for transformational partnerships and women's economic empowerment in agricultural value chains, which is basically a set of standards that we transformed into scorecards. And those scorecards are actually for social enterprises, for small and medium enterprises, for corporate agribusinesses, because they do have different contexts, and also for agricultural value chain program holders, which can be private sector, government, or even civil society-initiated agricultural value chain programs. And the objective of these scorecards is for them to be used as planning, monitoring, evaluation, and learning tools, so that all these value chain players can actually improve their practice in relation to empowering small producers, as well as enabling women's economic empowerment in agricultural value chains. As we know, in agriculture in developing countries, women are still invisible. They are underpaid, and when they're engaged, they're usually confronted with systemic barriers such as unpaid care work. So anyway, with this set of scorecards, we also are trying to engage governments. We developed a set of guidelines for transformational partnerships and women's economic empowerment in agricultural value chains, which is basically a result of a policy research that we did to enable the practice of the benchmarks by agricultural value chain players. So I think what we bring to the table is the discussion and discourse of accountability and transparency, putting the marginalized and the poor at the center of the accountability and transparency debate. Yeah. So I think it's important that we do that, and it's the reason why we're developing benchmarks and standards to that effect. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Very impressive. We received a concrete idea about what we can do, like using the scorecards and putting the marginalized and poor people in the center of the accountability process. I think it's a very important point. And that leads me to the next question to your Royal Highness. La Caixa Foundation has been focusing its international efforts in supporting also women and young people. And what indicators of success the foundation uses in its grant making to ensure that its activities answer to the local needs and measure the impact in a fair way?
Thank you, Esther, for your question. It's a pleasure to be here, and I hope I can add to everything that was said in the panel. To answer your question, at the international area of La Caixa Foundation, we're using a theory of change methodology in all our programs. We consider, as was said before also in the panel, that by strengthening the capacities and the networking of local and national organizations, international development will be more appropriate, relevant, effective, and will arrive quicker with better quality standards and adapted to the local context. For us, it is very important that to adapt actually to the local environment. This theory of change actually generates our main goal, which is to provide opportunities to the most vulnerable by listening to their needs and co-creating solutions through a competent, strong, innovative, and resilient network of main actors. And according to that, we launched in 2017 the Work for Progress program to promote quality employment for young, vulnerable women and youth in 3 countries, in Peru, India, and Mozambique. And Work for Progress was precisely born with the aim to respond to the needs of these communities in a more efficient way. And how do we do that? By allocating resources for a deeper understanding to the needs and the narratives of these communities, by promoting collaboration between the sectors, by creating spaces of experimentation and an evaluation system for learning and decision-making, adapting the strategy to ongoing contexts. The program has the aim of moving beyond the traditional approach of international cooperation based on financing isolated projects towards a more innovative mode, promoting open, innovative platforms integrated by non-profit organizations, academia, financial institutions, private sector, companies, accelerators, and public sector. We started this program in 2017 with 10 partners, and at the present we are 47 distributed between 9 networks in these 3 countries. And the novelty of Work for Progress and its methodology is actually it starts with a process of listening, of co-creating, prototyping, and acceleration, and all with a specific monitoring system at the center so as to achieve what we call a systemic impact. And regarding the evaluation process, the Work for Progress includes specific evaluation mechanisms in a complex situations which we know as developmental ongoing evaluation. And the main difference with other systems is the ability to respond to changing scenarios, to ongoing changes, with a focus on supporting the innovation processes and adapting to dynamic environments. And also the evaluators are not external observers, but an internal group involved in the implementation processes and who test new solutions in real time, focusing always on the learning processes. So it's always an active, ongoing process. And we're aware of the complexity of this type of evaluation, but by introducing a critical analysis with a strong component of adaptability, also makes Work for Progress a very flexible program. constantly adapting its governance system, exploring and mapping to integrate new actors, mainly through yearly open calls. The program is one that adapts, and for us it's a very important thing. It adapts to the environment and not vice versa, and this is the richness of the program. And finally, I would also like to point out the role of La Caixa Foundation is not only a financing one, but more of a connector between actors, identifying new organizations, like, for example, training, commercial connections, pushing them out of their comfort zone, and identifying duplicities. And in short, we don't want to be a mere funder, but a partner to the rest of the stakeholders involved in the entire process of the program. In this way, we strongly believe that we can make more of a difference, more of a systemic impact, and thus, at the end, improve the lives of the most vulnerable, which is, at the end of our day, our objective. Thanks a lot, Esther.
Thank you very much. Can I ask a very quick clarifying question? Like when you are bringing together these platforms and connecting the actors, is it around a specific team, or do you let them to create the team together? How it?
We always have the help of local organizations, but we listen to the community's needs, and they are the ones that they come up with the idea of the businesses that they want to create. Then is when the local organizations come in to help them push this project forward.
Excellent. That's really remarkable. We need to learn more about this experience, but the dynamic evaluation is really an excellent way of not doing evaluation in one point in the process, but do it constantly and improving the work. And sounds really exciting. Thank you. Naila, we got to an amazing point where you are supposed to help us to distill a little bit this discussion, but I also can't live without saying that yesterday I heard you speaking at the panel on enabling environment, and you mentioned that the Arab Foundations Forum just launched a very exciting report on enabling environment focused on Egypt, Jordan, Palestine, and Lebanon, if I remember correctly. And one of the findings is that Arab foundations have not really been doing enough or anything on the climate crisis and not coordinating around the topic. So does the discussion around just transition something that you think we need to take on, and how we can address it so that we ensure that transition towards climate neutral economy happens in fair way, leaving no one behind? It's not something that we've been really talking in the panel, but if you can address that, please.
Sure. Thank you so much. So just a very quick background on the Arab Foundations Forum. We're a network of donors, foundations, other philanthropy actors that work across the 22-country Arab region, as defined by members of the Arab League. So I'll just make a very quick I'll try to connect with the question that you just asked me, Esther, with sort of what I've been hearing around transparency and accountability on this panel. And to say that we discovered when COP27 and COP28 were announced that they were going to be taking place in our region, that none of the members in our network had any kind of work on climate, which was a bit of a shock, and sort of shocked the system in a sense, where many of our members all of a sudden were like, oh my God, we need to figure out how we're going to start presenting our work around climate. And it was a bit of a daunting task. And the connection that I'll make to that with transparency and accountability is, because of a lack of transparency and accountability in our sector, we wouldn't have known ahead of time that this was the issue, and that this was a problem, that we weren't looking at climate as a strategic priority. And so part of that has to do with having a gap in our data, So we know that we have a very big lack of data across the Arab region, particularly in civil society, and there are several factors that affect that. One is, we don't really come from a culture where there's a big expectation of transparency and accountability, and I think it's very important to remember that taxonomy matters in this context. So for some, in some cases, it's not for any sinister reason that we don't share data. It's that, particularly around philanthropy, the Arab region tends to have a culture of anonymity around giving, and that's very closely related to religious giving, right? So we have the higher value is placed on the giving, the more anonymous that giving is. So it's not necessarily that people don't want to be transparent and accountable, it's that we don't have the framework within which that accountability and transparency respects cultural norms. So that's one issue. Another is that, we don't really function within systems of government that reciprocate transparency and accountability, maybe is the most diplomatic way to say it. So the expectation around transparency and accountability isn't very high on both sides. And I think, we've tried to figure out how we can work around this in a way, and I think what we've been hearing everybody on this panel say, some of the themes that keep coming up is around, impact, how accountability and transparency affect impact, how they build trust, how they can affect capacity building, and how we can have standards and standardize some sort of set of metrics. And it's always important, I think, to look at local context within which these standards will be set. Because if I look at the Arab region and think about, standardizing a set of metrics that work in the global north, for example, many of those would not be applicable. And then in some cases, I think it's very important to also remember that accountability and transparency, as wonderful as they are as standalone values, can also sometimes be dangerous for civil society actors across the Arab region. And I'm generalizing, obviously, but that tends to be the case. So when it comes to climate, to try to bring it back to that question, we discovered this gap. And that gap would have put, the gap in our knowledge of who's working on climate in our region would have been filled had we had more data. So we've been scrambling, I think is the right way to describe our gathering of this information around who's working on climate, and also trying to figure out, rather than coming into the conversation with our members who, we have members in our network that are some of the largest foundations and donor agencies that work across the Arab region. So these are people who give a lot of money. And because the topic around climate and nature wasn't necessarily on the agenda, we didn't really want to come at it from a point of scaring everyone into action, because that might be a little bit daunting and off-putting. So instead, we tried to find out, how can we relate the climate crisis to what you're already doing, so that you're not necessarily trying to retrofit your programs, but in fact looking at how to increase the impact of your programs around climate. And I think, the issue around COP27 and 28 being in Egypt last month and then next year in the United Arab Emirates is that it will force a kind of transparency and accountability in a way around, any of the SDGs that address climate and nature. And so this could be a testing ground from the region in terms of how we use those metrics and maybe how we can standardize a little bit more moving forward.
Thank you, Naila. Thank you. So think about our frameworks, about also the security. There are always exceptions as well, and carefully measure that. I'm just checking our time, and we started late, so I guess we can finish a little bit late, right? Because we have a little technical problem here, but Casey has been so generous, and if I can read his handwriting, we received a few questions from online participants. One, and the way how it will go, because I think now we can open it up for a very brief questions and answers section, is that anyone who feels like wants to answer the question, please jump in. You are also here in the public very welcome to ask questions, but please make your questions brief. And you have to come up here, I think, to make that questions, because there is, where? A colleague, Rafa, yeah? Here, yeah, here, right here. You have to come to make your question. So also panelists, if you feel like asking each other questions, you are very welcome doing it. So the ones that I received from online participant is a question from a participant in Sudan, and he is asking, or she, is there a global initiative gathering actors to improve transparency and accountability? And how can organizations work jointly in improving their practices? Anyone who wants to address that?
Benjamin.
Do you want to say something, Benjamin?
Sure. Yeah. I can say something. I can say something around philanthropic organizations, philanthropic institutions working together towards that goal. And so at Wings, we're global networks, and most of our members are themselves networks or support organizations, including the Arab Foundations Forum, including CAF, including La Caixa. And Transparency Initiative. So we're all working together, and we have created working groups. So we're developing tools, because of course we need to have. We talked a lot about standards, so we need to have standards, and they need to be adapted. They need to be relevant to local contexts. So we're developing these tools with our members. So they're basically the ones who are, based on their experience, their needs, who are building these tools. So we referred earlier to the Transparency and Accountability Toolkit that we're relaunching shortly. But even before that, we also worked on the question of data, because one of the key elements is how do we first gather data in the first place and then be able to share that data. And so we created something called the Global Philanthropy Data Charter. And that's another tool that helps our sector to see how we can build good and solid data partnerships and share our data with a win-win approach. And so all of that is developed with our members, and then we also create groups for them to engage with each other and share practices and share challenges. And as Naila was saying, well, how does that apply in my context or not? How do we include the cultural dimensions and respect them? And so this is something that takes actually platforms for collaboration, and it's one of the key messages that Wings is always bringing, is that we need a strong infrastructure, we need a strong ecosystem for philanthropy. In our case, it's the same, of course, for civil society more broadly, so that we can, in a regular way, share practices, learn from each other, and improve on the journey. Because I think that was well said today, that we all try to improve our practices. There's no one in principle opposed to more accountability or more sharing, but it takes incentives, it takes tools, it takes platforms, and that requires actually investment. So we're always advocating for also more investments in this kind of work, which are critical to deliver more impact, because in the end, it's also about increasing our impact collectively.
Thank you.
It does surface, though, I think. I mean, I think it does surface a real opportunity for us, because there is a gap in a universal standard on what it means to be a not-for-profit organization, what it means to be giving a not-for-profit gift, and the levels of accountability you need for that gift to be genuine. And I think we were having this conversation only the other day. You know, one of the things I think we would very much encourage us to move towards as a global community is a form of almost WTO standard around those activities. And I think there is an opportunity for us to create a real cross-sectoral outcome around that if we choose to galvanize and focus in that direction. So I think the question does surface an interesting gap that does weaken our ability to deliver wider outcomes as articulated in the UN SDGs.
Excellent point. And you had...
I was just going to make the observation that, especially in terms of public governance and corporate governance and anti-corruption, our host, the OECD, publishes a lot of global standards. The key thing about the OECD standards on so many things is that they're a benchmarking. You can benchmark against them. And a lot of work goes into sort of identifying what best practices and what common practices in a variety of areas, and very useful work in that regard. And of course, in the work we're doing here too.
Great that you mentioned that. I was going to mention it as well. And there are also other multilateral collaborations, like there is the Open Government Partnership as well, that talks too about enabling civil society, transparency and accountability across sectors. But definitely more has to be done. The next question is from someone at UNAIDS who is asking us, how are foundations ensuring a focus on inequalities? Recent Oxfam report shows the increase in the gap between the richest and the poorest. Yeah, so focus on inequalities. Yeah, I think some of what we've been talking about is precisely how we have to listen more to the people in the ground, how we have to shift the power to the hands of those who are experiencing the rights violations and who are the most vulnerable. So I believe we have been all addressing it, but if you have any specific reactions on that question. Lisa, yeah, please.
I think, foundations, philanthropic organizations, governments, as well as private social investment, I think, need to give more attention to supporting social enterprises with the poor as primary stakeholders, because one of the things that we bring to the table is we create wealth and value, but at the same time, we distribute that wealth and value to the poor, who are our primary stakeholders. Mm-hmm. So by supporting us, we actually you're able to help us create wealth and distribute that wealth at the same time. No? So maybe there's a reason why we're wanting to advocate the mainstreaming of social enterprises with the poor as primary stakeholders as a major strategy for accelerating the Sustainable Development Goals if we are to address inequality. No? Because I think as a social mission-driven segment of the private sector, unlike the regular private sector that creates wealth and accumulates the wealth for the owners of capital, we actually create wealth and distribute that to the most marginalized. No? So actually, we believe that mainstreaming social enterprises and social entrepreneurship will be a game changer in accelerating, addressing poverty and inequality. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Our time is getting very, very, very short. So does anyone have, we have 5 minutes, oh my God. So
we can keep going for a long time. We can make 5 minutes work.
Maybe I had something.
Do you want to add something very brief, please, Monica?
Yeah, very briefly. Also on that last question is that another issue is that are governments having pro-poor policies? Because as development actors, then they align to those government priorities. So if the government has pro-poor priorities and that's targeting those left behind, then development actors align to them, then we'll address the issue of inequality. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So unless anyone has a super burning question that cannot keep in, oh, you are very, very respectful. In that case, I would like to also give a huge thanks to the joint support team who made possible this event. Thank you very much for your patience, kindness. And give the easiest task to Benjamin to summarize and give us the takeaway points from this very rich panel. Thank you, Benjamin.
Thank you, Esther. And I think you actually did a wonderful job at summarizing in an ongoing way as we were going through all the excellent remarks and points from the panel. So I felt that's been mainly covered, but maybe some of my takeaways are that first, this importance of being transparent and accountable is, of course, in terms of ethics and in terms of the how we want to change the world. It's not just what we're doing and how much, but it's also how, and I think that's important. But beyond the ethics and this dimension, there's just simply the more impact. We were talking about the way that learning and then being open to sharing these learnings is something that helps scale others to replicate. That's how we can share best practices. We can benchmark. So it's about impact. It's about growing our effectiveness, and that's critical in that sense. Another takeaway for me is this importance of developing standards, harmonizing when possible, and also building this infrastructure or this ecosystem to support these players, philanthropic actors, private social investors, in becoming more accountable and more transparent. I mean, if the Arab Foundation Forum did not exist, and did not engage its constituency in COP, they would probably not, even today, would not be aware of that big gap. So it's just like also highlighting these actors who are more in the backgrounds, behind the scenes, but are absolutely critical to increase this accountability and transparency of our sector. And on our side at Wings, as the global network that supports our field, will continue in the coming years to push and to work with our members towards greater accountability and transparency. We have a few different projects in the pipeline, including on how we should transform the philanthropic field and our guiding principles to deliver more impact. And that's going, of course, to cover and include transparency data as among the key topics. And of course, you will hopefully be able to access and give us feedback on the transparency and accountability toolkit when it will be shared. We're also supported, and I mentioned that it's important, by the European Union also is supporting this kind of work. So we're collaborating with them, and that's also thanks to their support that we're also able to engage our sector and develop this for the coming years further. So, but also want to thank you so much, Esther. I think it was an amazing facilitation and preparation, and also for the collaboration on the toolkit. And so, congratulations to all the panelists. That was excellent and really, really insightful debate. And thanks to all of you.
Thank you.